December 1944 had nearly broken the American lines. Hitler's desperate gamble in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, had pushed the Allies back, stretched their supply lines to the breaking point, and filled the field hospitals with frozen, wounded men. But by late January 1945, the lines had stabilized. The Germans had spent their best panzer divisions and much of their remaining fuel in a futile effort to reach Antwerp. Now they were in retreat. But retreating did not mean defeated. Not yet. And for the men of the 13th/18th Royal Hussars, a British armoured regiment that had fought from the sands of North Africa to the beaches of Normandy, the advance into Germany meant one thing: the fighting would only get worse, because the Germans were now defending their own soil. And they did not intend to give it up cheaply. Black and white footage of British tanks moving through a shattered French village.
Soldiers huddle on the back decks, breath misting in the cold air.
Among the thousands of men advancing eastward towards the Rhine was a young soldier named Les, a driver in a Sherman tank. His tank, like so many in the British Army, was American-made, AM4 Sherman, reliable, mechanically sound, but totally inadequate against the heavy German tanks they would be facing. But Les and his crew had survived this long. They'd come ashore on June 6, 1944, D-Day, on Sword Beach, one of the first waves to hit Hitler's Fortress Europe. They'd fought through the bocage country of Normandy, survived the Falaise Gap, liberated Brussels, and watched their friends die in the snows of the Ardennes. They had learned to be lucky. And they had learned to be careful. The Sherman tank was a study in compromises. Designed for mass production and ease of maintenance, it gave its crews certain advantages: reliability, good vision, a stabilized gun that could fire accurately on the move. But it also gave them a tall silhouette that made them easy targets, thin armor that German guns punched through like paper, and a cramped interior where every inch of space was precious. In that cramped space, men lived, ate, slept, and died together. The loader, wedged against the radio. The gunner, peering through telescopic sights. The commander, head and shoulders out of the hatch, scanning for threats. And the driver, hunched over his controls in the front hull, isolated from the rest of the crew, alone with his thoughts and the constant threat of a round coming through the thin armor inches from his face. Les was that driver. He sat in the left front of the tank, his position officially designated as the driver. Next to him on the right, sat the co-driver, a position that by early 1945 was often empty. In many Shermans, the co-driver's seat had been removed, replaced by racks of spare ammunition. Every extra shell was a gamble. More firepower meant less chance of running out in a fight. But it also meant sitting on a pile of high explosives, separated from the enemy's guns by barely 2 inches of steel. Les's tank was not just any Sherman. It was a Firefly, the British modification that wedged the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the Sherman's turret. The 17-pounder was, by 1944 standards, one of the few Allied guns that could reliably knock out a German Panther or Tiger at combat ranges. The British had designed it specifically to counter the heavy German armor that had dominated the battlefield since 1942. But the Firefly had a problem. The gun was too big. Designed for a larger tank, the 17-pounder barely fit in the Sherman's turret. The radio had to be moved to an external box on the back of the turret. The gun breech took up so much space that the turret could barely rotate with crew inside. And the long barrel made the tank awkward in close quarters, its nose heavy and its traverse slow. There was another problem too.
A human one.
The Sherman Firefly was a target. German tank crews and anti-tank gunners had learned to recognize the long gun. In a battle, they would pick off the Fireflies first, hoping to eliminate the biggest threats before engaging the standard Shermans. The life expectancy of a Firefly crew was measured not in years or months, but in engagements. Les's crew had beaten those odds. We named our tank Bobcat II. There had been a Bobcat I, back on D-Day, a duplex drive Sherman which swam ashore on Sword Beach. That tank got us through Normandy. But by the time we reached Germany, Bobcat I had been replaced. We painted the name on the new one, just as always. It was bad luck to change the name. Good luck to keep it. Good luck. WWII February 1945, the 13th/18th Hussars were pushing into the Rhineland, the industrial heartland of Western Germany. The terrain was different here. More open than the Bocage, more built up than the Ardennes. Villages dotted the landscape, their narrow streets perfect for ambushes. Farmhouses became strongpoints. Churches became observation posts. And everywhere, there were German tanks. Not in the numbers they'd faced in Normandy. The Wehrmacht was bleeding out, its best divisions destroyed in the east, its fuel supplies nearly exhausted. But the tanks that remained were still dangerous. Panthers, with their sloping armor and high-velocity 75mm guns. Tiger IIs, the monstrous King Tigers, with armor so thick no Sherman gun could penetrate it from the front. And there were the Panzer IVs, the veteran workhorses of the German panzer divisions, still deadly in the hands of crews who had survived 4 years of war. The Germans were fighting a delaying action now, buying time for the inevitable. They would hold a village, trade ground for casualties, and fall back to the next ridge line, the next stream, the next stone-walled farmhouse.
Every mile the British advanced cost blood.
Reenactment or period footage of a German village, partially destroyed. Tanks move cautiously down narrow streets. On a cold February morning in 1945, Bobcat 2 rolled into the outskirts of a small German village called Waldfurt. The name meant nothing to the crew, just another cluster of buildings on the map, another objective to secure, another place where Germans might be hiding. The village sat near the German-Dutch border, a few miles from the larger town of Heinsberg. It was typical of the region: narrow streets, two-story houses with steep roofs, a church spire visible above the treeline.
The kind of place where every window could hide a sniper, every cellar a machine gun. The crew of Bobcat 2 was tense.
They'd been in enough villages to know how quickly things could go wrong. The gunner, whose name history has not recorded, sat behind the massive breech of the 17-pounder. His world was a narrow slice of countryside seen through telescopic sights. The crosshairs, the target, the moment of truth when he pulled the trigger and sent a 17-pound shell toward an enemy tank. Like most gunners, he had habits.
Rituals.
Small things that made the terror of combat bearable. One of those habits was reading. In the long hours between fights, the waiting, the moving, the endless watchfulness, he would pull out a book. Paperbacks were passed around tank crews like currency, read and reread until the pages fell apart.
Westerns, detective stories, romances.
Anything to pass the time, to escape the cold and the fear and the constant awareness that death could come at any moment, from any direction. When a target was spotted, when the commander shouted orders and the tank lurched into action, the book would be put aside,
stuffed into a pocket,
dropped on the turret floor, wedged into any available space. On this day, in this village, the gunner put his book in a particular place.
The turret traversing ring.
The traversing ring was the mechanism that allowed the turret to rotate. A set of gears, powered by an electric motor or turned by hand in an emergency, that let the gunner track targets and bring the main gun to bear. It was a simple system, reliable, designed to work even when the tank was hit, even when the engine was dead. But it was not designed to work with a paperback book jammed in its gears. The crew of Bobcat 2 didn't know it yet, but they were carrying a time bomb. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that freezes. The kind that turns a 30-ton fighting vehicle into a steel coffin when a Tiger tank appears around the next corner. They would find out soon enough. The village of Waldfurt still stands today, a quiet community of a few thousand people. In February 1945, it was anything but quiet. The British advance had reached the edge of town. Infantry from the 13th/18th Hussars supporting battalions were clearing houses, room by room, while the tanks provided covering fire from the streets. It was slow, dangerous work. A Panzerfaust, the German one-shot anti-tank weapon, could destroy a Sherman from ambush at close range. Snipers could pick off commanders exposed in their turret hatches. Machine guns could pin down infantry, leaving them vulnerable to mortar fire. Bobcat 2 was moving cautiously between two semi-demolished houses, its long 17-pounder pointed forward, when the commander spotted something that made his blood run cold.
Movement.
At the far end of the street, partially obscured by rubble, a shape was emerging.
A low silhouette. A long gun.
The unmistakable outline of a German Tiger tank. The Tiger. The most feared tank of the European theater. With 100 millimeters of frontal armor, thicker than anything the Sherman carried, and an 88 millimeters gun that could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away, the Tiger was a predator. It had been designed to kill tanks, and it was very, very good at its job. The Tiger's crew had seen Bobcat 2 at the same moment. The German gun began to traverse, its massive turret rotating toward the British tank. In the turret of Bobcat 2, the commander shouted an order.
Gunner. Tiger. 11 o'clock. Traverse left.
The gunner's hands moved automatically, slamming the traversing control, his eyes already dropping to his sights, waiting for the turret to swing.
Nothing happened.
The turret didn't move. The gunner tried again.
Smacked the control.
Checked the manual override.
Nothing.
The turret was jammed solid. And the Tiger was still turning its gun toward them. In the chaos of the moment, no one had time to diagnose the problem. The gunner couldn't see the book. The commander couldn't see the book. All they knew was that their only weapon, the one thing that gave them a chance against the Tiger, was pointing in the wrong direction, and they couldn't move it. The Tiger's gun came to bear. The German gunner, calm and professional, had been fighting for years. He'd destroyed Shermans before. He knew exactly where to aim. At the driver's position.
At least.
The armor-piercing shell struck Bobcat 2 just behind the driver's head. It punched through the Sherman's thin frontal armor like a hot knife through butter, passed within inches of Les's skull, and exited the other side of the hull, leaving a hole the size of a fist in its wake. Miraculously, Les was alive. Wounded, bleeding, stunned, but alive. The shell had missed him by centimeters. The crew didn't wait to see what would happen next. The tank was hit. The Tiger was still there. In seconds, the hatches flew open and men scrambled out, dropping to the frozen ground, running for cover, leaving Les alone in the driver's compartment.
Les was trapped, wounded, bleeding,
pinned in his seat by the chaos of the moment. And then the Tiger fired again. This round struck the engine compartment. Bobcat 2, the tank that had survived D-Day, Normandy, the Bulge and 1,000 miles of combat, began to burn. Les was alone in a burning tank, wounded, with the Tiger still out there and his crew scattered. The odds of survival were measured in seconds. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in the 13th/18th Hussars, a story of desperation, courage, and the kind of luck that can't be explained, only told.
The interior of a burning Sherman tank. Smoke fills the compartment.
The orange glow of fire reflects off steel. When the second round hit Bobcat 2's engine compartment, the tank became a death trap. Sherman tanks had a terrible reputation for burning. Early models, with their ammunition stowed in unprotected racks along the sides, earned the nickname Ronsons, after the cigarette lighter that lights up every time. Later models introduced wet stowage, with the ammo stored in water glycol containers that reduced the risk of fire. But when a German 88mm round punched through the engine deck, all bets were off. The fire spread quickly. In the driver's compartment, Les could hear it, the crackling of flames, the popping of ammunition cooking off, the roar of ignition. He could feel the heat building through the steel floor and bulkheads. He could smell the smoke, acrid and toxic, seeping through every seam and crack. He had to get out. But getting out wasn't simple. The Tiger was still out there. Its crew, seeing the Sherman burning, knew that survivors might try to escape. They had machine guns for exactly that purpose. The characteristic ripping canvas sound of an MG-42, a sound every Allied soldier learned to dread, began to ping rounds off Bobcat 2's armor. Anyone who popped out of a hatch would be cut to pieces. Les's hatch was directly above his head. In a normal bailout, he would push it open, pull himself up, and drop to the ground on the left side of the tank, using the hull for cover. But the machine gun fire was coming from that side. The Germans had the angle. They were waiting. Les's wounds were serious. The shell that passed through the driver's compartment had sent fragments spinning through the air. Shrapnel had torn into his flesh. Blood soaked his uniform. Every movement sent pain screaming through his body. But the fire was getting closer. He could see it now, in the rearview mirrors mounted above his position, flames licking at the engine deck, smoke boiling into the sky. The ammunition stored in the turret and hull would eventually cook off. When that happened, the tank would become an oven. Then a bomb. He had seconds, not minutes, seconds. There was another way out. Beneath Les's feet, in the floor of the driver's compartment, was an escape hatch. Every Sherman had one. A small rectangular plate that could be unlatched and dropped, allowing the driver to drop down beneath the tank and crawl to safety. It was a last-ditch escape route, designed for exactly this kind of situation. But it had a problem. To use it, Les would have to drop down into the space beneath the tank, a space that was now directly in the line of fire. The Tiger's machine gunner might not be able to see him there, but the ground around the tank was open. If he crawled out from underneath, he'd be exposed. And there was another problem. The ammunition. Like most Shermans in 1945, Bobcat 2 carried extra ammunition wherever it could fit. The co-driver's seat, empty since Normandy, had been replaced with racks of 17-pounder shells, high-explosive and armor-piercing rounds, each one packed with enough explosive to kill a man 10 times over. To reach the escape hatch, Les would have to crawl across that ammunition. If a stray round from the Tiger hit the tank again, if a fire reached those shells, if anything caused them to detonate while he was lying on top of them, he wouldn't just die. He would cease to exist. Outside the tank, the situation was just as desperate. Les's crew had scattered, diving into ditches, scrambling behind rubble, trying to find cover from the Tiger's machine guns. The commander, the gunner, the loader, they were alive, but they couldn't help. They could only watch as their tank burned and their driver remained inside. One of them, Les's best mate in the regiment, had seen the whole thing. He was in another Sherman, somewhere down the street, trying to escape a Tiger of his own. I came tearing up the main street with a Tiger tank after me. I turned into a gap between two houses, turned the tank around to await the Tiger, and there across the road beside the house opposite was Les's tank, knocked out. I had to sit there for 2 hours before I could go over and see if he were alive or not. I could see where the armor-piercing shell had gone through the driver's compartment where he Saturday. 2 hours. That's how long the mate would have to wait, pinned down by the same Tiger that had killed Bobcat 2, unable to move, unable to help, able only to watch and wonder if his friend was already dead. But Les wasn't dead yet. Not quite. Les looked at the ammunition beneath him. He looked at the fire behind him. He listened to the machine gun fire outside.
And he moved.
Slowly, painfully, bleeding with every motion, he shifted his body toward the escape hatch. His hands found the latches. His feet pushed against the controls. The hatch dropped open beneath him, and he slid down into the darkness under the tank. The space was barely 18 inches high, just enough to squirm through, to drag himself along the frozen ground while bullets pinged off the hull above him. Dirt and gravel ground into his wounds.
Smoke choked his lungs.
The heat of the burning tank radiated down through the steel, cooking the ground beneath him.
He crawled.
He crawled until he reached the edge of the tank's shadow. He crawled until he could see daylight. He crawled until he could hear, above the chaos, the sounds of men shouting in English. His crew had found him. They pulled him out from under the tank, dragged him to cover, and began to treat his wounds while the battle still raged around them. The Tiger, satisfied with its kill, was already moving on, hunting for more Shermans to destroy.
Les was alive.
The medics got to him eventually. They patched him up, loaded him onto a jeep, and evacuated him to a field hospital somewhere behind the lines. The last thing he saw of Waldfute was smoke rising from the village. Smoke from burning buildings, burning tanks, burning dreams. He would never fight in a tank again.
But he would live.
And he would have a story to tell. After the battle, after the lines moved east and Waldfute was secured, Les's best mate finally got his chance to go back. He found Bobcat 2 where it had been hit, still sitting between those two houses, its turret still jammed, its engine compartment gutted by fire. He walked around it slowly, looking at the damage, trying to understand how anyone could have survived. The hole where the first shell entered, right behind the driver's head.
The scorch marks from the fire. The escape hatch, still open, still waiting.
I could see where the armor-piercing shell had gone through the driver's compartment where he sat. I later heard that he had been wounded and taken to hospital. 2 hours he'd waited. 2 hours wondering if his friend was alive or dead. 2 hours listening to the battle rage around him, unable to do anything but survive and hope. Later, he would write about that day. His account would survive in family letters, in forum posts, in the collective memory of the regiment. It would become part of the larger story of the 13th/18th Hussars, a regiment that had fought from the sands of North Africa to the heart of Germany, losing men and tanks along the way, but never losing its soul.
Les survived the war.
After his recovery, he was given a new assignment, company movie operator, showing films to troops about the dangers of unprotected sex. It was, as his son would later wryly note, a testament to his luck. From the driver's seat of a burning tank to a projector in a rear area cinema, there were worse fates. But he never forgot Waldfute. He never forgot the book that jammed the turret. He never forgot the Tiger that nearly killed him. And he never forgot the men who pulled him out from under that burning tank, who risked their own lives to save his, who proved that in the chaos of combat, the bond between crewmates was stronger than any German armor. Waldfute today is a quiet place.
The scars of war have faded.
The houses have been rebuilt. The fields have been plowed and planted so many times that no trace of the battle remains. But the story remains. It survives in forum posts written by Les's son, sharing his father's experience with a new generation. It survives in the regimental histories of the 13th/18th Hussars. It survives in the memories of families who still tell the story of the day their father, their grandfather, their uncle crawled out from under a burning tank and lived. I'm very glad to say that my dad survived. After release from hospital, he was given the job of company movie operator, showing films to the troops of the dangers of unprotected sex. Yes, he always was a lucky bastard.
A lucky bastard.
That's what the soldiers called men who survived against all odds. Men who walked away from burning tanks. Men who came home when so many didn't. Les was one of the lucky ones. But luck in war is never just luck. It's training. It's instinct. It's the willingness to keep moving when every instinct says to stop. It's the bond between men who trust each other with their lives. And sometimes, it's the simple act of crawling across a pile of ammunition, through fire and smoke and machine gun fire, because the alternative is unthinkable. The story of Bobcat 2 is not unique. Across all the theaters of World War II, thousands of tank crews faced the same terror. The jammed gun, the burning tank, the long crawl to survival.
Some made it, some didn't.
But every story shares a common thread. The men inside those steel boxes were not machines. They were farmers and factory workers, teachers and truck drivers, sons and fathers and brothers. They were scared.
They were brave. They were human.
And when their guns jammed, when their tanks burned, when death reached out to claim them, they fought.
Not for glory. Not for country. For each other.
Today, the Sherman tanks that survive sit in museums, their guns forever silent, their crews long gone. Visitors walk past them, reading about armor thickness and engine horsepower, about battle honors and kill ratios. But the real story isn't in the statistics. It's in the small details. The book that jammed a turret.
The hatch that saved a life.
The mate who waited 2 hours to learn if his friend was alive. It's in the men who fought, and the men who came home, and the men who didn't. And it's in the knowledge that when the guns jammed, when the tanks burned, when everything went wrong, they kept fighting. Because that's what soldiers do. FL survived the war and returned home to his family. His story was shared by his son on military history forums, ensuring that the memory of Bobcat II and its crew would not be forgotten. The 13th/18th Royal Hussars were amalgamated in 1992 and now form part of the Light Dragoons, continuing a lineage that stretches back to 1715. The Tiger tank that destroyed Bobcat II was likely knocked out later in the war, its fate unknown. Most German tanks ended as scrap.